The woman crouched behind the wagon wheel, one hand pressed firmly over her 6-year-old son's mouth, as horses thundered past on the main road. And she could taste the metallic tang of fear on her own tongue while dust clouds swirled around them in the fading Colorado twilight. Victoria Brennan had been running for 3 years. 3 long years since she had fled St. Louis with her boy, Samuel, clutched to her chest, leaving behind a life that had become a waking nightmare. Her husband Thomas had been a respected banker, or so everyone believed. What they did not know was that behind closed doors, he was a monster who saw his family as property to control and punish. When his violence turned toward their innocent child, Victoria knew she had no choice but to disappear. The riders passed, and Victoria slowly released her breath. Samuel's wide brown eyes looked up at her, questions swimming in their depths, but he remained silent as she had taught him. "Good boy. Always such a good boy. Come on, sweetheart," she whispered, taking his small hand in hers. "We need to keep moving." They had been traveling for 2 weeks since leaving the last town, where a stranger's too curious stare had sent Victoria's instincts screaming. Thomas had money and connections. He would have hired men to search for her, men who would drag her back to face consequences she could not bear to imagine. More than that, he would take Samuel from her, and she would die before allowing that to happen. The road stretched before them in the dying light of September 1876. According to the last signpost, they were approaching Platteville, Colorado, a small farming and ranching community near the South Platte River. Victoria prayed it would be remote enough, quiet enough, to finally stop running. Her legs ached as they walked. The small amount of money she had managed to steal from Thomas before fleeing was nearly gone. She had sold her wedding ring months ago, and the simple calico dress she wore was faded and patched. Her blonde hair, once carefully curled and pinned, now hung in a simple braid down her back. She was 24 years old and felt ancient. Samuel stumbled and Victoria caught him. "I know you are tired, my love. Just a little further." The boy nodded, his face streaked with dust and sweat. He never complained, her Samuel. He had grown so quiet since they left, as though he understood that their very lives depended on remaining invisible. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky orange and purple, Victoria spotted buildings ahead. Platteville emerged from the prairie like a promise. It was small, perhaps 20 buildings clustered along a single main street. A general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a boarding house, a stable, and a scattering of homes. Perfect. Victoria's heart hammered as they walked into town. A few people were still out despite the late hour. An older woman sweeping the porch of the boarding house glanced up, her weathered face neutral. 2 men stood outside the saloon, their conversation pausing as they noticed the strangers. Victoria kept her head down, leading Samuel toward the general store. Through the window, she could see lamplight and movement. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and a portly man with wire-rimmed spectacles looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, miss?" His voice was friendly but cautious, as most people were with strangers. "I am looking for work," Victoria said, keeping her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "And a place to stay. My son and I have been traveling, and I am hoping to settle here." The shopkeeper studied her for a long moment. Victoria knew what he saw. A young woman alone with a child, no wedding ring, no husband in sight. She had learned to let people draw their own conclusions. A widow was respectable enough. A woman fleeing her husband was scandal. "I am Walter Simmons," the man said finally. "This is my store. Cannot say I have work myself, but Mrs. Harriet Moss runs the boarding house next door. She might have something. She is always complaining about needing help with the cooking and cleaning." "Thank you," Victoria said, relief flooding through her. Thank you so much. You have money for supplies?" Walter asked, not unkindly. Victoria pulled out the few coins remaining in her pocket. "A little," Walter nodded slowly. "Tell you what, you look like you and the boy could use a good meal. My wife Martha always makes extra. Why do not you head over to the boarding house, talk to Mrs. Moss, and I will send Martha over with some stew in a bit." Tears pricked Victoria's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Sir, I do not know how to thank you." "No need," Walter said, waving his hand. "We take care of our own here in Platteville. If you are planning to stay, that makes you one of us." Victoria squeezed Samuel's hand and headed back out into the gathering darkness. The boarding house was a two-story structure with a wide porch. The older woman Victoria had seen earlier was still there, now lighting lanterns. "Mrs. Moss," Victoria called softly as she approached. The woman turned, holding a lantern up to better see them. She was perhaps 60, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "That would be me." "Who is asking?" "My name is Victoria Brennan. This is my son Samuel. Mr. Simmons at the general store said you might have work available. I am a hard worker, madam. I can cook, clean, sew, tend a garden, whatever you need." Mrs. Moss descended the porch steps, bringing the lantern closer. Her gaze swept over Victoria and Samuel, taking in their worn clothes and exhausted faces. "Where is your husband?" "Dead, madam," Victoria said quietly. The lie came easily now, worn smooth by repetition. "Fever took him last year. We have been traveling, looking for a place to start fresh." "Any family?" "No, madam. It is just Samuel and me now." Mrs. Moss was silent for a long moment, and Victoria held her breath. Then the older woman sighed. "I suppose I could use the help. These old bones are not what they used to be. I have 4 rooms I rent out to workers passing through, plus 3 permanent residents. Keeping up with all the washing and cooking is getting to be too much." "I will work hard," Victoria promised. "You will not regret it. Room and board for you and the boy, plus $2 a week," Mrs. Moss said. "There is a small room off the kitchen you can use. It is not much, but it is clean." "It sounds perfect," Victoria said, and meant it. "Walls and a roof and safety." "Come on then," Mrs. Moss said, gesturing toward the door. "Let me show you around." The boarding house was simple but well maintained. The main floor had a large dining room with 2 long tables, a sitting room with a few chairs and a wood stove, and a kitchen that smelled of bread and coffee. Mrs. Moss led them through the kitchen to a small room that held a narrow bed, a washstand, and little else. "I know it is tight," Mrs. Moss said, "but you are welcome to it." "It is wonderful," Victoria said honestly. After sleeping in barns and under wagons, a real bed seemed like a luxury beyond measure. "You look dead on your feet," Mrs. Moss observed. "Get yourselves washed up. Martha Simmons will be by shortly with food, then you should rest. You can start work in the morning." True to Walter's word, Martha Simmons arrived within the hour carrying a pot of beef stew and fresh bread. She was a plump, cheerful woman who asked no uncomfortable questions, simply set the food down and wished them a good night. Victoria and Samuel ate in silence, too hungry and tired for conversation. The stew was rich and hearty, and Victoria felt strength seeping back into her bones with each bite. When they finished, she helped Samuel wash and tucked him into the narrow bed. There was barely room for both of them, but they had slept in closer quarters before. "Mama," Samuel whispered as she lay down beside him, "are we safe here?" Victoria wrapped her arms around her son, breathing in the little boy smell of him. "Yes, sweetheart, we are safe here." She prayed she was telling the truth. Victoria woke before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing. For a moment, disoriented in the unfamiliar room, panic seized her. Then memory returned, and with it, a fragile sense of relief. Platteville, the boarding house, work. She slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Samuel, and dressed in the dim pre-dawn light. When she emerged into the kitchen, she found Mrs. Moss already there, stoking the fire in the large cast-iron stove. "You are an early riser," the older woman observed. "Always have been," Victoria said. "What would you like me to do first?" Mrs. Moss looked pleased. "Start with getting the coffee going. The men will be down soon and they like their coffee strong and hot. Then we will need to get breakfast on. Biscuits, bacon, eggs. I have 6 mouths to feed this morning." Victoria set to work, grateful for tasks that kept her hands and mind occupied. She had learned to cook properly during her marriage, though Thomas had rarely been satisfied with her efforts. Here, there was no one to criticize, only honest work for honest pay. The residents began trickling down as the sun rose. 3 were railroad workers, rough men with calloused hands who nodded politely and attacked their breakfast with single-minded focus. The 4th was an older gentleman who introduced himself as Mr. Horace Whitfield, a retired schoolteacher who had settled in Platteville to live out his remaining years in peace. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mrs. Brennan," he said with old-fashioned courtesy. Samuel appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and Victoria quickly fixed him a plate. He sat quietly in the corner, eating his breakfast while the men talked about their work and the weather. The days began to fall into a rhythm. Victoria rose early, prepared meals, cleaned rooms, did laundry in the big copper tub behind the house, and fell into bed exhausted each night. Samuel helped where he could, fetching water and gathering eggs from the chickens Mrs. Moss kept in a small coop. It was hard work, but it was honest, and for the first time in years, Victoria felt the constant knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. 3 weeks after their arrival, Victoria was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard horses approaching. Her hand stilled on the sheet she was pinning, and she fought the urge to grab Samuel and run. Not every rider was a threat. She had to learn to live without jumping at every shadow. The horses stopped in front of the boarding house, and Victoria heard voices. Male voices, too low to make out words. She forced herself to continue with the laundry, though her ears were straining to hear. "Mrs. Brennan," Mrs. Moss called from the back door. "We have a new boarder. Come meet him." Victoria's stomach clenched, but she wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the house. A man stood on the back porch next to Mrs. Moss, and Victoria's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscled build that spoke of hard physical labor. Dark brown hair, slightly too long, curled at the nape of his neck beneath a worn cowboy hat. But it was his face that arrested her. Strong jaw, straight nose, and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to see too much. He looked to be in his late 20s, and there was something about the way he held himself, a quiet confidence that made her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Mrs. Brennan, this is Ryder Quinn," Mrs. Moss said. "He is a ranch hand at the Double J spread a few miles out. Going to be staying with us for a spell while he helps build their new barn." Ryder removed his hat, revealing those gray eyes fully. "Madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through Victoria's chest. "Mr. Quinn," she managed, nodding politely while avoiding direct eye contact. "Ryder is fine," he said. "No need for formalities." Victoria could feel his gaze on her, steady and assessing, and it made her want to run. She was not ready for anyone to look at her too closely, to ask questions she could not answer. "I will get your room ready, Mr. Quinn," she said, already turning away. "Ryder," he corrected gently. She fled into the house without responding. Over the following days, Victoria tried to avoid Ryder Quinn as much as possible. It was not easy. He took his meals at the boarding house, and he had a way of appearing in doorways just as she was passing through, or sitting on the porch in the evenings when she went to shake out the rugs. He was always polite, always respectful, but his presence made her nervous in a way she could not quite define. It was not just that he was a man, though that alone would have been enough. There were other men at the boarding house, and while Victoria was wary of them all, she had learned to move through her duties without incident. No, Ryder was different. He watched her with those storm-gray eyes, not in a way that felt predatory or threatening, but rather as though he was trying to puzzle something out. As though he could see beneath the careful mask she wore and glimpse the fear that still lived in her bones. Samuel, to her surprise and dismay, was drawn to Ryder immediately. The boy who had grown so quiet and cautious seemed to light up whenever the cowboy was near. Victoria would find them together on the porch, Ryder whittling a piece of wood while Samuel watched in fascination, or Ryder showing Samuel how to tie knots with a length of rope. "He is teaching me, Mama," Samuel said excitedly one evening. "He says every boy should know how to tie a proper knot." Victoria's chest tightened. "That is kind of him, but you should not bother Mr. Quinn, sweetheart. I am sure he has better things to do." "The boy is no bother," Ryder said from the doorway, and Victoria jumped. She had not heard him approach. "He is good company." Victoria turned to face him, clutching the dish towel in her hands like a shield. Even so, Samuel needs to learn not to impose on others. Something flickered across Ryder's face, too quick for her to read. "If I felt imposed upon, I would say so. I am not one to mince words, Mrs. Brennan." They stared at each other for a long moment, and Victoria felt heat creep up her neck. There was a challenge in his gaze, but also something softer. Invitation, perhaps. She looked away first. "Samuel, come help me with the dishes." Samuel obeyed reluctantly, throwing a longing glance back at Ryder as he followed his mother into the kitchen. That night, lying in the narrow bed with Samuel warm against her side, Victoria allowed herself to think about Ryder Quinn. He was handsome, certainly, but that was not what unsettled her. Thomas had been handsome too, charming and attentive during their courtship. She had learned that a pleasant exterior could hide cruelty. No, what disturbed her about Ryder was the way he made her feel. When he looked at her, something inside her chest fluttered, a sensation she had not felt in years. It was dangerous. She could not afford to feel anything for any man. Her only priority was keeping Samuel safe, and that meant remaining invisible, unremarkable, forgettable. Men noticed women. Men asked questions. Men caused complications. She would have to be more careful. October arrived with cooler temperatures and the smell of harvested fields. Victoria had been in Platteville for 6 weeks, and the tight ball of constant terror in her chest had loosened to a dull, ever-present anxiety. No strangers had come asking questions. No one seemed interested in her past. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were truly safe. She was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when Mrs. Moss entered, looking troubled. "Victoria, I need to talk to you about something." Victoria's hand stilled. Her mind immediately went to the worst possibilities. Someone had come asking about her. Thomas had found her. They needed to run. "I am getting old," Mrs. Moss said, "and this winter is going to be hard on me. My daughter in Denver has been writing, asking me to come stay with her. I have been putting her off, but I think it is time." "You are leaving?" Victoria asked, relief and new worry warring within her. "I am thinking about selling the boarding house," Mrs. Moss continued, "but I wanted to talk to you first. You are a good worker, Victoria, and you have a good head on your shoulders. If you wanted to buy it, I would give you fair terms." Victoria stared at her, dough forgotten. "Mrs. Moss, I do not have that kind of money." "I know that," the older woman said gently. "But I could work out payments. You keep the boarding house running, give me a portion of the earnings each month until it is paid off. It would take a few years, but you would have a real home, a real business. Security for you and your boy." It was everything Victoria had not dared to dream of: a home, a legitimate business, the ability to support herself and Samuel without fear. "I do not know what to say," Victoria whispered. "Say you will think about it," Mrs. Moss said. "You do not have to decide right away, but I wanted you to know you have options." Victoria nodded, her mind spinning. Could she really do this? Could she put down real roots, build a life here? She was still thinking about it that evening when Ryder found her on the back porch. She was snapping green beans for supper, and he settled onto the steps without invitation. "You look like you have something heavy on your mind," he observed. Victoria glanced at him, then back at the beans in her lap. "Just thinking about the future." "The future can be a tricky thing to think about," Ryder said. "Never quite turns out the way you expect." "Do you spend much time thinking about the future, Mr. Quinn?" "Ryder," he corrected automatically. "And yes, I do. Man has to have something to work toward, or what is the point?" "What are you working toward?" Victoria asked, surprising herself. She had been avoiding personal conversations with him for weeks, and here she was asking about his dreams. Ryder was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. "My own spread someday. Nothing big, just enough land to run some cattle, build a house, maybe have a family. A place that is mine where no one can tell me to move along." There was something in his voice, a longing that resonated deep in Victoria's chest. She understood that desire for a place to belong, for safety and permanence. "That sounds nice," she said softly. "What about you?" Ryder asked, turning those gray eyes on her. "What is your dream, Victoria?" The use of her first name sent a shiver through her. "I am not sure I am allowed to dream anymore." "Everyone is allowed to dream." Victoria shook her head. "Some of us just need to survive." Ryder leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and studied her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "What are you surviving, Victoria? What are you running from?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I am not running from anything." "I do not believe that," Ryder said quietly. "I have been watching you. You jump at sudden noises. You never fully relax. Every time a stranger comes to town, you look like you are planning an escape route. That is not the behavior of a woman at peace." Victoria stood abruptly, beans scattering. "You have no right to watch me or make assumptions about my life." Ryder rose too, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "You are right. I apologize. But Victoria, I want you to know something." He paused, waiting until she reluctantly met his eyes. "Whatever you are running from, whatever you are afraid of, no one hunts you here. Do you understand me? This is a good town, full of good people who protect their own. If you need protecting, all you have to do is ask." Tears burned behind Victoria's eyes. She wanted desperately to believe him, to trust in his words and the gentleness in his voice. But trust was a luxury she could not afford. "Thank you," she managed. "But we are fine. Samuel and I are just fine." She fled into the house before he could see her cry. That night, Victoria lay awake long after Samuel had fallen asleep. Ryder's words echoed in her mind. "No one hunts you here." Could it be true? Could she really stop running? And more unsettling, why did the idea of Ryder Quinn protecting her make her feel warm and safe instead of trapped and afraid? She did not have answers, and the questions themselves terrified her. The next morning, Victoria made a decision. She found Mrs. Moss before breakfast and told her she would like to accept the offer to buy the boarding house. The older woman beamed and pulled out papers she had already prepared, laying out the terms clearly. Victoria would make monthly payments, and the boarding house would be hers within 5 years if she kept up with the agreement. It was the first time since fleeing St. Louis that Victoria had made a plan that extended beyond the next few days. It felt both liberating and terrifying. Word spread quickly through the small town that Victoria Brennan was the new owner of the boarding house. People she had barely spoken to stopped by to wish her well. Walter Simmons extended her credit at the general store for supplies. The blacksmith's wife brought over a basket of preserves. It was the kind of community support Victoria had never experienced, and it left her feeling grateful and guilty in equal measure. These people were being kind to her based on a lie. Ryder had been away for several days, working at the Double J Ranch, and Victoria found herself looking toward the road more often than she cared to admit, watching for his return. When he finally rode up to the boarding house on a crisp October evening, something in her chest loosened. He came to the kitchen door, hat in hand, and his eyes found hers immediately. "Heard you are the new proprietor. Congratulations." "Thank you," Victoria said, trying to ignore how the simple act of him standing there made her pulse race. "Does that mean you are planning to stay in Platteville for a while?" "That is the plan," Victoria admitted. Ryder smiled, and it transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "Good. That is real good to hear." He left before she could respond, but Victoria stood in the kitchen for several minutes afterward, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was doing strange, fluttering things. The weeks passed, and Victoria fell into her new role as boarding house owner. Mrs. Moss stayed for another month, helping with the transition, then departed for Denver with tears and promises to write. Victoria was on her own, and the responsibility was both daunting and exhilarating. Samuel started attending the small school that Mr. Whitfield, the retired teacher boarding at the house, had organized for the town's children. Watching her son leave each morning with a slate and a lunch pail, chattering excitedly about lessons, Victoria felt her heart swell. This was the life she had wanted for him. Safety, normalcy, childhood. Ryder became a permanent fixture. His work at the Double J had ended, but he found other jobs around Platteville and surrounding ranches. He always came back to the boarding house, though, and Victoria had stopped trying to figure out why that pleased her so much. He continued to spend time with Samuel, teaching the boy things a father might teach: how to care for a horse, how to mend a fence, how to read the weather in the sky. Victoria knew she should discourage it. Samuel was getting attached, and attachment meant vulnerability. But she could not bring herself to forbid it, not when she saw how happy Samuel was, how he bloomed under Ryder's patient attention. And truthfully, she was getting attached too. It happened in small moments. The way Ryder would appear to help when she was struggling with a heavy load. The way he always made sure to compliment her cooking, even when she knew it was merely passable. The way he looked at her, as though she was something precious and worth protecting. One evening in late November, Victoria was working on mending linens by lamplight when Ryder knocked softly on the kitchen door frame. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course," Victoria said, setting aside her sewing. Ryder entered and sat down across from her at the kitchen table. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. He was normally so calm and self-assured. "I need to tell you something," he began, "and I do not want you to take it the wrong way." Victoria's stomach clenched. "What is it?" "A few weeks back, I was in Denver on business. While I was there, I saw wanted posters." He paused, his gray eyes searching her face. "One of them was for you." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. The room tilted, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "What?" "It did not use your name," Ryder continued quickly. "It just described a young blonde woman traveling with a small boy, said she was wanted for kidnapping and theft, offered a substantial reward." "I did not kidnap anyone," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "Samuel is my son, my son." "I know that," Ryder said firmly. "I knew that the moment I read it. That poster was not written by someone looking for justice. It was written by someone looking to control." Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now. "He will never stop. He will never let us go." "Who is he?" Ryder asked gently. Victoria knew she should not tell him. Knew that every person who learned the truth was another risk, another potential betrayal. But she was so tired of carrying the weight alone, and Ryder already knew the most dangerous part. "My husband," she whispered. "Thomas Brennan. We were married when I was 18. I thought he was a good man. By the time I realized what he truly was, it was too late." "Did he hurt you?" Ryder's voice was low and dangerous. Victoria nodded, unable to speak. "And Samuel?" "Not yet," Victoria said. "But he was going to." I saw it in his eyes. The same rage he turned on me was starting to focus on Samuel, and I knew I had to get him away. So I took what little money I could and ran. We have been running ever since." Ryder reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough and warm, and Victoria did not pull away. "Listen to me," Ryder said. "I took down all the posters I could find in Denver, but that does not mean there are not others. Victoria, you need to file for divorce. You need legal protection." "I cannot," Victoria said miserably. "Thomas would never grant me a divorce, and no judge would rule in favor of a wife who fled. They would send me back to him. They would take Samuel." "Not if we do it right," Ryder insisted. "Not if we get witnesses to testify to his character. Not if we can prove he is a danger." Victoria shook her head. "You do not understand. Thomas is wealthy and respected. He has friends in government, judges in his pocket. No one would believe a woman's word over his." Ryder was quiet for a long moment, his thumb moving in small circles over the back of her hand. Victoria realized she should pull away, but she did not want to. His touch was comfort and strength, not threat or demand. "Then we keep you hidden," Ryder said finally. "You have done a good job so far of disappearing. We just need to be smarter about it." "We?" Victoria asked. "Yes, we," Ryder said, meeting her eyes. "You are not alone in this anymore, Victoria. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you or Samuel, I promise you that." "Why?" Victoria whispered. "Why would you put yourself at risk for us?" Ryder smiled, soft and sad. "I think you know why." Victoria's breath caught. She did know, had known for weeks, even as she tried to deny it. The way Ryder looked at her, the way he found excuses to be near her, the way he had inserted himself into their lives so completely. He cared for her, possibly more than cared. And God help her, she cared for him too. "I cannot give you what you want," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "I am still married. I am a fugitive. I have nothing to offer you but trouble and danger." "Then I guess I will take trouble and danger," Ryder said, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "Get some rest, Victoria. We will figure this out, I promise." He left, and Victoria sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, her hand still warm from his touch. Winter came to Colorado with biting winds and snow that piled in drifts against the buildings. Victoria kept the boarding house warm and welcoming, cooking hearty meals and making sure the fires stayed lit. Samuel loved the snow, playing in it with the other children from school, his cheeks pink and his laughter bright. Ryder had been true to his word. He appointed himself their protector, though he did it so subtly that most people probably did not notice. He was simply always there, a steady, solid presence. When strangers came through town, he made a point of observing them, asking casual questions about where they were from and where they were headed. He taught Samuel to recognize men who might be searching for them, what signs to watch for. It should have made Victoria more afraid, this acknowledgement that the threat was real. Instead, she felt safer than she had in years. she also felt something else, something warm and terrifying that bloomed in her chest every time Ryder walked into a room. She was falling in love with him. She tried to fight it, tried to maintain distance, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. Ryder was patient. He did not push or demand. He simply existed in her orbit, steady and true, waiting for her to come to him. It happened on a cold December evening. Most of the boarders had gone to the saloon, and Samuel was asleep in their room. Victoria was in the kitchen cleaning up from supper when Ryder appeared in the doorway. "Need any help?" he asked. "I am nearly finished," Victoria said, but she did not object when he picked up a dish towel and started drying the plates she had washed. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Ryder said, "I have been thinking about what you told me, about your husband." Victoria's hands stilled in the soapy water. "I want to marry you," Ryder continued, and Victoria's head snapped up. He held up a hand before she could speak. "I know you are already married in the eyes of the law, but I do not care about the law. I care about you and Samuel. I want to protect you, provide for you, build a life with you. We can have our own ceremony, make our own promises. It would not be legal, but it would be real. More real than any marriage that involved cruelty and fear." "Ryder," Victoria whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "I love you," Ryder said simply. "I have loved you since the first day I saw you, looking like you were ready to bolt at any second. I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you care for Samuel, the way you have built a home here against all odds. I love you, Victoria, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that not all men are monsters." Victoria was crying openly now. "I love you too," she admitted. "I have tried not to. I have tried to keep my distance, but I cannot help it. You have been nothing but kind and patient and good, and I do not know what I did to deserve you." Ryder closed the distance between them, cupping her face gently in his hands. "You do not have to deserve love, Victoria. Love is not something you earn. It just is." He kissed her then, soft and careful, as though she was something fragile and precious. Victoria melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for the first time in years she felt safe. Truly, completely safe. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "Say you will marry me, in whatever way we can. Say you will be mine and let me be yours." "Yes," Victoria whispered. "Yes, Ryder, I will marry you." They were married 3 days before Christmas in the small church at the edge of town. The minister, Reverend Brown, was a kind man who asked no uncomfortable questions when Victoria explained that she was a widow and Ryder was ready to take on both her and her son. It was not technically a lie, Victoria told herself. In every way that mattered, her marriage to Thomas had died long ago. Samuel was thrilled. He stood beside them during the ceremony, beaming so hard Victoria thought his face might split. When Reverend Brown pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel threw his arms around Ryder's legs and declared him the best father in the world. Ryder's eyes shone with emotion as he knelt down to Samuel's level. "I promise you, son, I will always take care of you and your mother. Always." The small gathering of townspeople who had attended the ceremony clapped and congratulated them. Victoria wore a simple blue dress that Martha Simmons had helped her sew, and Ryder looked handsome in a new shirt and pressed trousers. They had a small celebration at the boarding house afterward, with cake and coffee and good wishes. That night, after Samuel was asleep in what was now his own small room adjacent to the kitchen, Ryder carried Victoria over the threshold of the room they would share. It was the largest room in the boarding house, one that had previously been rented to guests, but Victoria had cleared it out and made it their own. Ryder set her down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "We can wait. I do not want to rush you." Victoria reached up and cupped his face, marveling at the softness of his beard under her fingers. "I am sure I want this. I want you." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Victoria felt desire unfurl in her belly. Thomas had made intimacy something to endure, something painful and demeaning. But this was different. Ryder was different. He touched her like she was precious, kissed her like she was a gift. When they finally came together, Victoria cried, but they were tears of relief and joy and healing. Ryder held her afterward, his arms strong and safe around her, and she fell asleep listening to the steady beat of his heart. She was home. Finally, truly home. The winter months passed in a blur of quiet happiness. Ryder continued to work various jobs around Platteville, saving money toward his dream of owning land. Victoria managed the boarding house, which stayed busy despite the cold weather. Samuel flourished in school and under Ryder's attention. They were a family, and Victoria had never imagined she could feel so content. But peace, Victoria was learning, was always temporary. It was early March when the strangers came to town. Two men on horseback, dressed in dark suits and carrying themselves with an air of authority. They stopped at the general store first, asking questions. Victoria heard about it from Martha Simmons, who came rushing to the boarding house with worry etched on her round face. "They were asking about a woman and a boy," Martha said breathlessly. "A blonde woman traveling alone." "Victoria, I am worried they might be looking for you." Ice flooded Victoria's veins. "What did Walter tell them?" "Nothing," Martha assured her. "He said he had not seen anyone matching that description, but Victoria, they are going door to door. They will come here eventually." Victoria's mind raced. She should run, grab Samuel and disappear into the countryside. But it was still winter, and where would they go? And more than that, she was tired of running. This was her home now. These were her people. "Where is Ryder?" she asked. "He is working at the Patterson farm today," Martha said. "About an hour's ride from here. Can you get him? Tell him what is happening," Martha nodded. "I will send Walter immediately." As Martha hurried away, Victoria tried to calm herself. She had an hour, maybe two, before the men reached the boarding house. She needed a plan. Samuel was at school. That was good. He was safe there, surrounded by other children and Mr. Whitfield. Victoria went through the boarding house, making sure everything looked normal and undisturbed. Then she changed into her plainest dress and pulled her hair back severely. She needed to look unremarkable, forgettable. The knock came an hour later. Victoria took a deep breath, steadied herself, and opened the door. The two men stood on her porch, and Victoria's heart sank. One was older, perhaps 50, with silver in his dark hair and cold blue eyes. The other was younger, broad-shouldered and mean-looking. They both studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Good afternoon, madam," the older man said. His voice was cultured with a slight Eastern accent. "My name is Detective Harold Morton. This is my associate, Mr. Reeves. We are looking for someone, and we were hoping you might be able to help us." "I will try," Victoria said, keeping her voice steady. "What can I do for you?" Detective Morton pulled out a piece of paper and unfolded it. It was a drawing, a surprisingly accurate sketch of Victoria's face. "We are looking for this woman. Her name is Victoria Brennan. She is wanted for kidnapping and theft. She is believed to be traveling with a young boy, approximately 6 years old." Victoria forced herself to study the drawing, her mind working frantically. Deny everything. Give them nothing. "I am sorry," she said, handing the paper back. "I have not seen her. We get travelers through here occasionally, but no one matching that description has stayed at my boarding house." Morton's eyes narrowed. "You are certain?" "Quite certain," Victoria said firmly. "What is your name, madam?" Morton asked. "Victoria Quinn," she said. using her new married name and praying he would not make the connection. "And you run this boarding house alone?" "No, I run it with my husband, Ryder Quinn." Morton exchanged a glance with Reeves. "May we speak with your husband?" "He is working today," Victoria said. "He should be back this evening if you would like to return then." "Perhaps we will do that," Morton said. He was still studying her face, and Victoria could see suspicion in his eyes. He did not quite believe her, but he did not have proof. "Good day, gentlemen," Victoria said, moving to close the door. Morton's foot shot out, blocking it. "One more thing, Mrs. Quinn. The woman we are looking for is a criminal. She stole a substantial sum of money from her husband and kidnapped his child. If you see her, it would be in your best interest to inform us immediately. There is a significant reward for information leading to her capture." "I will keep that in mind," Victoria said coldly. "Now please remove your foot from my door." Morton smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Of course." "Good day, madam." The moment the door closed, Victoria's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, her whole body shaking. They were here. Thomas had found her. She did not know how long she sat there, but eventually she heard hoofbeats, and then Ryder was bursting through the door. He took one look at her crumpled on the floor and swept her into his arms. "I am here," he said fiercely. "I am here, Victoria. Tell me what happened." Through shaking breaths, she told him about the detectives, about the drawing, about the thinly veiled accusations. "They know," she whispered when she finished. "They know it is me. They will be back with the sheriff, and they will take me. They will take Samuel." "No," Ryder said firmly. "No, they will not. Victoria, look at me." He waited until her terrified eyes met his. "I told you before, no one hunts you here. This is our town. These are our people. We will fight this together." "How?" Victoria asked desperately. "They have the law on their side." "Then we change the law," Ryder said. "We get you a divorce. We prove that you were fleeing abuse, not committing a crime. We protect Samuel." "There is not enough time," Victoria said. "They will be back tonight or tomorrow. We do not have weeks or months to fight this in court." Ryder was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his face hardened with determination. "Then we make them understand that taking you by force is not going to be easy. Come on." He pulled Victoria to her feet and led her out of the boarding house. They went straight to the general store, where Walter and Martha were waiting anxiously. "Spread the word," Ryder said. "I need everyone who cares about Victoria and Samuel to meet at the church in 1 hour. Everyone." Walter nodded and hurried off. Within the hour, nearly the entire town had gathered. Farmers, ranch hands, shopkeepers, wives and mothers and children. They filled the small church, and Victoria stood at the front with Ryder's arm around her waist, staring at all these people who had become her community. Reverend Brown stepped forward. "Ryder, you called us here. What is this about?" Ryder took a deep breath. "It is about protecting one of our own. Victoria needs our help." He told them everything. About Thomas, about the abuse, about the years of running and hiding. He told them about the detectives in town and the threat they represented. Through it all, Victoria stood silent, tears streaming down her face, certain that once everyone knew the truth, they would turn away. But they did not. When Ryder finished, there was a long moment of silence. Then Martha Simmons stood up. "I do not care what some fancy detective from back east says," she declared, her round face fierce. "Victoria is one of us. She is a good woman, a good mother, and a hard worker. If those men try to take her, they will have to go through me." "And me," Walter added, standing beside his wife. "And me," said Mr. Whitfield. One by one, everyone in the church stood. The blacksmith and his wife. The farmers who rented rooms at the boarding house. The women who brought their children to school with Samuel. All of them declaring their support. Victoria could not speak. The lump in her throat was too large, the emotion too overwhelming. Reverend Brown moved to stand beside her. The Bible says to protect the widow and the orphan, to defend those who cannot defend themselves. Victoria, this congregation stands with you. Whatever comes, you are not facing it alone. That night, when Detective Morton and Reeves returned to the boarding house, they found a very different reception. Ryder answered the door, and behind him stood Walter, the blacksmith Tom Henderson, and 3 other men from town. "Gentlemen," Ryder said, his voice cold, "I understand you have been harassing my wife." Morton's eyes flickered with surprise. "Your wife?" "That is right. Victoria is my wife, legally married right here in Platteville, and she has not committed any crime." "She is wanted for kidnapping and theft," Morton said. "She fled an abusive marriage with her own child," Ryder countered. "That is not kidnapping. And as for theft, I would be interested to know what Thomas Brennan claims was stolen. Because from what my wife tells me, she left with only the clothes on her back and enough money to feed her child." "These are serious allegations," Reeves said, speaking for the first time. His voice was rough, threatening. "So take them to the sheriff," Ryder said. "I am sure Sheriff Davis would be very interested in your claims. Of course, he has known Victoria for months now. Knows she is a respectable businesswoman and a devoted mother. I wonder whose word he will take. Hers and the word of everyone in this town, or that of 2 strangers working for a man who has never set foot in Colorado." Morton's face darkened. "You are interfering with official business." "No," said Sheriff Davis, stepping onto the porch from where he had been standing in the shadows. Victoria had not even known he was there. "You are interfering with the peace of my town. I have been listening to your claims, Detective Morton, and I am not impressed. You have no warrant, no legal standing to remove anyone from Platteville. And I have a church full of people willing to testify that Victoria Quinn, formerly Brennan, is a woman of good character who fled danger." "The boy belongs to his father," Morton insisted. "The boy belongs with his mother," Sheriff Davis said flatly. "Now I am going to give you a choice. You can leave Platteville peacefully, or I can arrest you for disturbing the peace and harassment. What will it be?" Morton stared at the sheriff, then at Ryder, then at the gathering crowd of townspeople who had followed the sheriff to the boarding house. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, and he knew it. "This is not over," he said finally. "Thomas Brennan is a powerful man. He will not give up." "Neither will we," Ryder said simply. The 2 detectives left, riding out of town into the darkness. Victoria, watching from the window, felt something loosen in her chest. They had won, at least for now. But Ryder was right about one thing: Thomas would not give up. This was a reprieve, not a solution. Over the following weeks, Ryder consulted with a lawyer in Denver about Victoria's options. The news was not good. Colorado had recently passed laws making it easier for women to file for divorce, but it would still be difficult to prove abuse, and even more difficult to guarantee that Victoria would retain custody of Samuel. Thomas's wealth and connections gave him significant advantages. "We need witnesses," the lawyer said. "People who can testify to his character, who can provide evidence of abuse. Everyone who knew what Thomas was really like is back in St. Louis," Victoria said despairingly. "And most of them would lie for him anyway." "Not everyone," Ryder said thoughtfully. "What about servants? Did you have staff in your home?" Victoria's eyes widened. "We had a housekeeper, Mrs. Alina Gray. She saw everything. She helped me more than once after Thomas had been particularly brutal. But I do not know if she would be willing to testify. She needs her position." "Let me see what I can find out," Ryder said. He was gone for 2 weeks, and Victoria nearly went mad with worry. But when he returned, he had Mrs. Gray with him. The older woman embraced Victoria the moment she saw her, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Oh, my dear girl, I have been so worried about you." "You came all this way," Victoria said, incredulous. "Of course I did," Mrs. Gray said firmly. "When this young man found me and told me what you needed, I did not hesitate. I should have done something years ago. I should have helped you leave sooner." "You did help me," Victoria said. "You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me kindness when everything else was cruelty." With Mrs. Gray's testimony and the support of the Platteville community, the lawyer was optimistic. They filed for divorce in Denver, citing abuse and abandonment. Thomas would be served papers, and there would be a hearing. It took 6 months for the case to make its way through the courts. 6 months of waiting and worrying and wondering if Thomas would show up in Colorado to fight in person. He did not. Instead, he sent lawyers, expensive ones who argued that Victoria was a hysterical woman who had stolen his child and his money, but the judge was not swayed. Mrs. Gray's testimony was damning, and the doctor Victoria had occasionally seen for injuries provided medical records documenting broken bones and bruises that Victoria had tried to pass off as accidents. The entire town of Platteville sent letters of support, attesting to Victoria's character and her devotion to Samuel. In the end, the judge granted the divorce. He awarded full custody of Samuel to Victoria and ordered Thomas to pay a substantial amount in support, though Victoria knew she would likely never see that money. She did not care. She was free. When the telegram arrived with the news, Victoria collapsed into Ryder's arms and sobbed. They were tears of relief, of joy, of release. "It is over," she whispered. "It is finally over." "Not quite," Ryder said, pulling back to look at her. "We had a ceremony before, but it was not legal. I want to marry you again, properly this time. No lies, no hiding, just you and me and our son." "Our son," Victoria repeated, loving the sound of that. They were married again in the spring of 1877, with the whole town in attendance. Samuel, now 7 and growing tall, stood beside them as Ryder's best man. Victoria wore a dress of pale yellow that Martha and the other women of Platteville had sewn for her, and she felt beautiful and loved and safe. When Reverend Brown pronounced them husband and wife this time, it was with full legal standing. Ryder kissed her as the congregation cheered, and Victoria knew that this was what marriage was supposed to be. Partnership, love, and choosing each other every single day. After the wedding, there was a celebration that lasted well into the night. As Victoria danced with Ryder in the church hall, she looked around at the smiling faces of the people who had become her family. She thought about how far she had come, from the terrified woman crouched behind a wagon wheel to this confident woman who owned a business and had people who loved her. "What are you thinking about?" Ryder asked, his arms strong around her waist. "About how lucky I am," Victoria said. "About how I never thought I could have this." "You deserve this," Ryder said firmly. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Victoria Quinn." Over the next few years, their lives settled into a comfortable rhythm. The boarding house continued to thrive under Victoria's management. Ryder saved enough money to buy a small parcel of land just outside Platteville, where he started building the ranch he had always dreamed of. Samuel grew into a bright, happy boy who loved school and horses and helping Ryder with the ranch work. And in the summer of 1879, Victoria gave birth to a daughter. They named her Grace because she was proof of God's grace and the second chances that life could offer. Samuel was thrilled with his baby sister, and Ryder was a devoted father to both children. Victoria sometimes thought about Thomas, wondered if he ever regretted his cruelty, if he ever thought about the family he had lost through his own actions. But those thoughts came less and less frequently. That chapter of her life was closed, and she had no desire to reopen it. One evening, when Grace was nearly 2 and Samuel was a lanky 9-year-old, Victoria stood on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset. The boarding house was now run by a capable young couple she had hired, though she still checked in regularly. Ryder's ranch was growing, and they had a small but healthy herd of cattle. Samuel was chasing Grace around the yard, both of them laughing, and Ryder was in the barn finishing up the evening chores. This was her life now. This peace, this joy, this family. It had seemed impossible once, a dream too fragile to even voice. But she had fought for it, had run for it, had risked everything for it. Ryder emerged from the barn and walked toward her, his gray eyes warm in the fading light. He climbed the porch steps and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, echoing the question he had asked on their wedding night. "About how you kept your promise," Victoria said softly. "You said no one hunts us here. You said you would protect us. And you did." "I always will," Ryder said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "For as long as I live, Victoria, you and these children are my priority. My family." Victoria turned in his arms to face him. "I love you," she said. "I do not think I tell you that enough, but I love you so much, Ryder. You saved us. You gave us a life I did not think we could have." "You saved yourself," Ryder corrected gently. "You were the one brave enough to run, brave enough to start over. I just gave you a safe place to land." They stood together on the porch, watching their children play as the Colorado sky turned shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel and the prairie grass swayed in the evening breeze. This was home. This was family. This was love, and it was everything. As the years continued to pass, the Quinn family became a cornerstone of the Platteville community. Ryder's ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the region for quality cattle. Victoria's boarding house remained successful, and she had expanded it slightly, adding on 2 more rooms to accommodate the growing number of travelers passing through. Samuel grew into a fine young man, serious and hardworking like his stepfather, but with his mother's kind heart. He went to school in Denver for a time, studying agriculture and business, then returned to help Ryder run the ranch. When he was 22, he married a sweet-tempered girl named Elizabeth from a neighboring farm, and they built a house on the Quinn land. Grace was bright and spirited, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. She inherited Victoria's business sense and started helping manage the boarding house accounts when she was barely 14. She had a gift for numbers and organization that impressed everyone who met her. In 1885, Victoria gave birth to twin boys, Robert and William. Ryder joked that they were his retirement plan, 2 more hands to help with the ranch work. Victoria just marveled at the fullness of her life, at the family that surrounded her with love and laughter. Thomas Brennan died in 1887. Victoria received a letter from a lawyer in St. Louis informing her of his passing and asking if she had any interest in her portion of his estate as his former wife. Victoria wrote back declining. She wanted nothing from that man, nothing that would connect her to those dark years. She had built her own fortune, earned her own way, and she was proud of that. When she told Ryder about the letter, he simply nodded. "That chapter is closed," he said. "We do not need to reopen it." But Victoria did feel something when she learned of Thomas's death. Not grief, certainly not sadness, but closure. A final, definitive end to the fear that had haunted her for so many years. He could never hurt her again. He could never come for Samuel. It was truly, completely over. The town of Platteville continued to grow and change around them. The railroad expanded its reach, bringing more commerce and more people. New businesses opened, and the small farming community became a more substantial town. Through it all, the Quinns remained steady fixtures, respected and loved by their neighbors. Victoria often thought about that first terrified night when she had arrived in Platteville with Samuel, exhausted and desperate. She thought about the kindness of strangers who had become family, about the community that had protected her when she needed it most. And she thought about Ryder, the cowboy who had looked at a frightened woman and her son and decided they were worth protecting, worth loving. In the autumn of 1895, Victoria and Ryder celebrated their 18th anniversary. Their children gathered around them. Samuel with Elizabeth and their 3 children, Grace, who was now courting a young lawyer from Denver, and the twins who were 10 and as wild as colts. They had a party at the ranch, with neighbors and friends coming from miles around. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. As Victoria watched her family and friends celebrating, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Ryder found her standing alone for a moment, observing the festivities. He slipped his hand into hers and she laced their fingers together automatically after years of practice. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously," Victoria said. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life." "Believe it," Ryder said, pulling her close. "You built this, Victoria. This family, this community, this life. You did that." "We did that," Victoria corrected. "Together." As the sun set over the prairie and the party continued around them, Victoria leaned her head against Ryder's shoulder and thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain and the fear and the running, but also the courage and the hope and the love. She had been hunted once, but she had found a place where she was protected. She had been broken once, but she had healed. She had been lost once, but she had found her way home. And now, surrounded by the people she loved in the place she loved, Victoria Quinn knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges still, because life always brought challenges. But they would face them together, as they always had. As a family. As partners. As 2 people who had chosen each other and continued to choose each other every single day. Grace married her lawyer in 1897, and they settled in Denver, though they visited the ranch frequently. The twins decided to stay and work the land with Samuel, and soon the Quinn Ranch was one of the largest operations in the region. Ryder began to slow down as he entered his 50s, letting his sons take on more of the physical labor, but he never stopped working entirely. The land was in his blood, and Victoria knew he would work it until the day he died. Victoria herself remained active in the community. She eventually sold the boarding house to a young family who reminded her of herself all those years ago, desperate for a chance, willing to work hard, looking for a place to belong. She made them the same deal Mrs. Moss had made her, allowing them to pay over time, giving them the opportunity she had been given. Instead of managing the boarding house, Victoria turned her attention to helping other women in difficult situations. She began quietly offering assistance to women fleeing abuse, giving them a safe place to stay and helping them get on their feet. Word spread through quiet channels, and women would appear at the Quinn Ranch, frightened and desperate, looking for the woman who understood. Victoria never turned anyone away. She would set them up in the small cabin they had built for such purposes, feed them, clothe them, and help them figure out their next steps. Some stayed in the area. Others moved on to fresh starts elsewhere. But all of them left knowing they were not alone, that there were people who cared, that there was hope even in the darkest moments. Ryder supported her work wholeheartedly. He would help the women with practical matters, finding them jobs or teaching them skills. He would stand as a witness in court if needed, or simply provide a reassuring presence. His quiet strength and unwavering support made Victoria love him even more, if that was possible. In 1902, Samuel's wife Elizabeth died suddenly of pneumonia. It devastated the entire family, but especially Samuel and his 3 children, who ranged in age from 8 to 14. Victoria moved into Samuel's house for several months, helping care for her grandchildren and supporting her son through his grief. It reminded her painfully of her own losses, of the darkness she had endured. But it also showed her how far she had come, how strong she had become. Samuel eventually recovered, though he never remarried. He threw himself into the ranch work and into raising his children. Victoria was proud of the man he had become, strong, compassionate, and devoted to family. He had no memory of Thomas, the man whose blood he carried. Ryder was his father in every way that mattered. The new century brought changes to Colorado and to Platteville. Automobiles began appearing on the roads, though horses were still more practical for ranch work. Electricity came to town, and suddenly the world seemed brighter, more modern. The Wild West that Victoria had known was fading into memory, becoming history rather than present reality. But some things remained constant. The land, the sky, the community that had grown up around the small farming town. The Quinns remained pillars of that community, and Victoria remained devoted to helping those who needed it most. In 1910, Victoria and Ryder celebrated their 33rd anniversary. They were both in their 50s now, with lines around their eyes and silver threading through their hair. But when Ryder looked at Victoria, she still felt like that young woman who had arrived in Platteville so long ago. And when she looked at him, she still saw the handsome cowboy who had promised to protect her. They sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset as they had done countless times before. Their great-grandchildren were playing in the yard now, another generation of Quinns growing up on this land. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked suddenly. "Taking us on? You could have had an easier life if you had just let us go." Ryder turned to look at her, and the love in his eyes was so fierce it took her breath away even after all these years. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "You and Samuel were the best things that ever happened to me, Victoria. You gave me purpose and family and love. Why would I regret that?" "We brought trouble," Victoria pointed out. "You brought joy," Ryder corrected. "Everything else we faced together and we came through it. That is what family does. That is what love does." Victoria leaned over and kissed him, soft and sweet, a kiss that held decades of partnership and devotion. "I love you, Ryder Quinn. I love you too, Victoria Quinn. Always have, always will." As darkness fell and the stars began to appear in the vast Colorado sky, Victoria thought about the words Ryder had said to her so many years ago, the words that had changed everything. "No one hunts you here." It had been more than a promise. It had been a prophecy. She had found safety in Platteville, but more than that, she had found home. She had found family. She had found herself. The scared woman hiding behind a wagon wheel was gone, replaced by someone strong and confident and loved. And all of it, every moment of happiness and peace, had started with a cowboy who looked at a stranger and decided she was worth fighting for. Victoria had spent the first part of her life running from darkness. She had spent the second part running toward light. And now, in what she knew were likely the final chapters, she was simply living in that light, surrounded by the people she loved, secure in the knowledge that she was safe and cherished. The Wild West was fading into history, but the lessons it had taught her remained. About courage and community, about standing up for what was right, about the power of choosing love over fear, and about the promise that could be kept by a good man with a kind heart who said simply, No one hunts you here. It was enough. It had always been enough. It would always be enough. Years continued their steady march forward, and the Quinn family grew and flourished like the prairie grass after spring rain. Ryder and Victoria aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. They became the elder statesmen of Platteville, the couple that young people looked to as an example of what marriage could be when built on trust and respect. In 1918, the twins both married within months of each other, Robert to a rancher's daughter from the next county and William to a school teacher from Denver. Grace's children were grown now too, and the Quinn Ranch was a sprawling operation that employed dozens of people and stretched across hundreds of acres. Victoria continued her quiet work helping women in need until she was well into her 60s. Even when her body began to slow down, her mind remained sharp and her determination unwavering. She had saved countless women over the years, giving them the chance she had been given, helping them build new lives free from fear. Ryder remained her constant companion and supporter. They had built more than a family together. They had built a legacy of compassion and strength. The community knew that the Quinns would help anyone in genuine need, and that reputation was something Victoria treasured more than any material wealth. In the spring of 1925, Victoria fell ill. It started as a simple cold but developed into pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of doctors and the devoted care of her family, she weakened steadily. Ryder never left her side, sitting by her bed and holding her hand as he had done for nearly 50 years. "I am not afraid," Victoria told him one evening as the sun set outside their bedroom window. "I have had such a good life, Ryder, so much more than I ever dreamed possible." "Do not talk like that," Ryder said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are going to be fine." Victoria smiled at him, her hand weak in his. "We both know that is not true, and it is all right. I am ready." "I am not," Ryder said, and tears slid down his weathered cheeks. "I am not ready to lose you, Victoria. You will never lose me," Victoria said softly. "I will always be with you. In every sunset we watched together, in every moment of laughter we shared, in our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I will be there, Ryder, always." Samuel came into the room then, followed by Grace and the twins. All of Victoria's children gathered around her bed, their faces streaked with tears. Victoria looked at each of them, these people she had loved more than life itself. "Be good to each other," she whispered. "Take care of your father, and remember that love is the strongest force in the world. It can heal wounds that seem impossible to heal. It can create safety where there was only danger. Never forget that." She fell asleep that night holding Ryder's hand and surrounded by her children. And in the early hours of the morning, with the first light of dawn breaking over the prairie, Victoria Quinn passed peacefully from the world. The entire town of Platteville came to her funeral. People traveled from Denver and Colorado Springs and small towns across the state. They came to pay respects to a woman who had touched countless lives, who had shown courage in the face of terror and compassion in the face of suffering. Ryder stood at the graveside, his face gray and drawn, as they lowered Victoria into the earth. Samuel stood beside him, one hand on his father's shoulder, providing the support that Ryder had always provided for others. After the service, as people gathered at the ranch to share stories and food, an elderly woman approached Ryder. He did not recognize her at first, but then she said softly, "You do not remember me, but I remember you and Victoria. 20 years ago I came to your ranch. I was running from a husband who beat me and I had nowhere to go. Victoria took me in. She helped me get a divorce and find work. She saved my life. I am glad she could help," Ryder said, his voice thick. I am not the only one here who could tell a similar story," the woman continued. "There are at least a dozen women at this gathering who owe their lives and their freedom to Victoria. She was a light in the darkness for so many of us." Throughout the afternoon, more women came forward with similar stories. Some Ryder knew about, others Victoria had never mentioned. Each woman spoke of Victoria's kindness, her strength, her unwavering belief that everyone deserved safety and love. As Ryder listened, he realized that Victoria's legacy was even greater than he had known. She had not just survived her own trauma, she had transformed it into purpose, helping others survive theirs. She had taken her pain and turned it into healing for countless others. Ryder lived for another 5 years after Victoria's death. They were lonely years in many ways, despite being surrounded by family. He missed Victoria with an ache that never fully subsided. But he also felt her presence constantly, in the wind that swept across the prairie, in the laughter of his grandchildren, in the quiet moments of sunset. He continued Victoria's work as best he could, maintaining the safe house for women in need and contributing to organizations that helped abuse victims. It was his way of honoring her memory and continuing the mission that had meant so much to her. In the summer of 1930, Ryder Quinn died peacefully in his sleep. He was 78 years old and had lived a full, rich life. His children buried him next to Victoria, and the entire community mourned the loss of a man who had been a pillar of strength and decency. The Quinn Ranch continued through the generations, passed down from Samuel to his children, and then to theirs. The boarding house in Platteville that had been Victoria's first home in town was eventually converted into a community center, and a plaque was placed outside telling the story of Victoria Quinn and her legacy of helping those in need. The Wild West that Victoria and Ryder had known faded completely into history, but the values they had embodied remained. Their descendants carried forward the lessons they had taught, about courage, about community, about standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves. And late at night, when the wind swept across the Colorado prairie and the stars glittered in the vast sky, people would sometimes tell the story of the woman who had run from darkness and found light, and the cowboy who had promised her that no one would hunt her, and how that promise had changed not just 2 lives but generations of lives. It was a love story, yes, but it was more than that. It was a story about the power of choosing compassion over cruelty, about building something beautiful from broken pieces, about the way one person's courage can inspire courage in others. Victoria Brennan had arrived in Platteville in 1876, a frightened woman with a child and nothing else. She had left behind a cruel past and stepped into an uncertain future. But she had found a cowboy named Ryder Quinn who had looked at her and said words that would echo through the decades. "No one hunts you here." And in saying those words and keeping that promise, he had given her the greatest gift imaginable, the freedom to live without fear, to love without reservation, to build a life worth living. Their story became legend in Platteville, passed down through generations. Young couples would visit the graves of Ryder and Victoria Quinn, standing hand in hand as they read the simple epitaphs. Victoria Quinn, 1852–1925. She brought light to the darkness. Ryder Quinn, 1852–1930. He kept his promises. And beneath both inscriptions, added years later by their descendants, a single line that summed up their entire legacy: "No one hunts you here." It was a promise, a prophecy, and a truth that had transformed not just 2 lives but an entire community. It was the foundation upon which a family had been built, the principle that had guided generations. The Wild West was gone, but what Victoria and Ryder had created together remained. Their love story had begun with fear and flight, but had ended with peace and purpose. They had faced down darkness and emerged into light. They had built something lasting from something broken. And long after they were gone, their story continued to inspire, to give hope, to remind people that no matter how dark the past, there was always the possibility of a brighter future. That no matter how frightened you were, there were good people in the world who would stand beside you. That no matter how alone you felt, there was always the possibility of finding home. That was the true legacy of Victoria and Ryder Quinn. Not just the ranch or the family or the material things they had built, but the proof that love could conquer fear, that courage could defeat cruelty, and that sometimes, when you are running from darkness, you might just find someone who will look at you and say the words that change everything. No one hunts you here. It was enough. It had always been enough. It would always be enough. And as the years turned into decades and the decades into a century, their story lived on, a testament to the power of love, the importance of community, and the truth that even in the wildest of places, even in the harshest of times, kindness and courage could create something beautiful. The Wild West had been a hard place, an unforgiving place, but it had also been a place where people could start over, where the past did not have to define the future, where a frightened woman and a kind cowboy could meet by chance and build something that would last for generations. That was the promise of the West, and Victoria and Ryder Quinn had lived that promise fully. They had taken their chance at a new beginning and turned it into a lifetime of love, a legacy of compassion, and a story that would never be forgotten. In Platteville, Colorado, where the prairie stretched to the horizon and the mountains stood sentinel in the distance, their story was still told. And every time it was told, it reminded people of what was possible when fear was met with courage, when cruelty was answered with kindness, and when two hearts found each other against all odds. Victoria and Ryder Quinn had lived and loved and left the world better than they found it. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried their names and their values forward into the future. And somewhere in the Colorado wind, if you listened carefully, you could still hear the echo of a promise that had changed everything. No one hunts you here. It was the end of one story and the beginning of countless others. It was the closing of one chapter and the opening of many more. It was proof that love endures, that kindness matters, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for another person is simply to offer them safety and say, "You belong here. You are protected here. You are home." And that was how the story of Victoria and Ryder Quinn lived on, not just in memory but in action, not just in words but in deeds, not just in the past but in the present and the future. A lasting testament to the power of two people who chose love over fear and built something beautiful from that choice. Their story was complete. Their journey was ended. But their legacy lived on generation after generation, a bright thread woven through the fabric of a community, a family, and a way of life. And it all began with a frightened woman behind a wagon wheel, a kind cowboy with storm-gray eyes, and a promise that changed two lives forever. No one hunts you here.